So it gets worse in Uvalde. 376 police, a force larger than the garrison that defended the Alamo, responded to a chaotic, uncoordinated scene that lasted for more than an hour. The group was devoid of clear leadership, basic communications, and sufficient urgency. And how did this person know this stuff? Because it came from a report. Report on Uvalde shooting finds systemic failures in the police response. You're not going to believe this. You're not going to believe this. It's hard for me to wrap my brain around this. I have already read it. The first comprehensive assessment of the law enforcement response to the deadly school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, found that blame for the failure to swiftly confront the gunman rested not only with the school police chief, but also with the scores 12, scores of state and federal officers who gathered at the deadly scene but did not act. The 77-page report, released on Sunday by the Special Texas House Committee, represented a broad indictment of the police inaction at Robb Elementary School, citing systemic failures that left the school inadequately secured and the police officers who responded mired in confusion and bad information. Nearly 400 officers responded to the school that day. 400. Wow. Yet the decision to finally confront the gunman was made by a small group of officers, including specially trained Border Patrol agents and a deputy sheriff from a neighboring county. The report found, concluding that others at the scene could have taken charge and done so far earlier, but nobody would take charge. They're all playing dress up. They all got their guns and their shields and their cowboy hats, and nobody's going to do anything to save those kids. Nothing. Why? Oh, so this person says, watch. So this guy's wearing a ballistic. I showed this the other day. This guy's wearing a vest and a thing, and there's kids being shot, and this guy takes time out to do this, to go get some hand sanitizer. Sure. So you can turn it all the way down. So he takes some time out to go get the hand sanitizer. You don't want to get a cold. He literally did that. The report found that a flawless police response would not have saved most of the victims who suffered devastating injuries when they were shot with a high-powered AR-15 style rifle by a gunman. Some died on the way to the hospital, the report noted, adding in a final footnote that it is plausible that some victims could have survived if they had not had to wait for rescue. If there's only one thing that I can tell you is there were multiple systemic failures. Who said that? State Representative Dustin Burrows. He spearheaded the investigation. Several officers in the hallway or in that building knew or should have known there was dying in that classroom, and they should have done more and acted with urgency. The officers waited, the report found, even as at least one high-ranking official, the acting chief of the Uvalde Police Department, learned that a teacher was wounded but still alive and that a child had been calling 911 for help from inside the classroom. So the police chief of the Uvalde Police Department, the acting chief of the Uvalde Police Department, he knew that there were people wounded inside that classroom and they were calling 911. The committee found that none of the officers who learned of the calls advocated for shifting to an active shooter-style response or otherwise acting more urgently to breach the classroom. So they got that information, so the cops knew that they should have been on an active shooter footing, and they didn't. Why? Because they were scared to go in there. They were scared to do their job. They were afraid. They were cowards of the highest order. They are people who become cops for the wrong reasons. Why? Because they're insecure bullies, which is what most of the people are who become cops. They're the people who bullied you in high school or the people who got bullied. Those are the people who become cops. While the narrative presented by the committee added disturbing new details, it did not substantially change the public understanding of what took place. Instead, it deepened the sense of rudderless law enforcement response. The chief of the Uvalde Police Department called from his vacation to tell the acting chief, Lieutenant Pargas, to set up a command post. Mr. Pargas did so in an office at a funeral home across the street. But then he left it shortly thereafter. This did not result in the establishment of an effective command post. So he was told to set up a command post. He did for 5 seconds and then he left. So there was no command post set up. Why? Because he didn't want to take command. The report found that one reason that flawed information made its way into an initial news conference held by Governor Greg Abbott the day after the shooting, one of the reasons was that the Uvalde police lieutenant who had been at the scene and was supposed to brief the governor, he literally passed out while waiting in the hallway beforehand. So I guess the governor didn't get his debriefing or his briefing. He didn't get his briefing on what happened, and he went and did the press conference anyway. Is that what they're saying? A regional director for the state police held the briefing instead. Oh, so he did get briefed. But his information was secondhand. Still, the facts of what unfolded were unclear even to some of the participants, the report found. For example, one of the first officers at the school, a Uvalde police officer armed with his own AR-15 style rifle, he arrived to the sound of gunfire and saw a person dressed in black. The officer then took cover, believing the person to be a gunman. Later, told other officers who responded and investigators that he had not tried to fire at the person because of children nearby. But the person had not been the gunman, the report found, but rather a school coach hustling children to safety. Now, there was a report of a cop who did see the shooter and asked for permission to shoot the shooter and never got permission. So in this situation, it was a good idea that guy didn't shoot him because it turns out it wasn't the shooter he saw. But in the other situation, the guy did see the shooter. The report found the egregious poor decision-making went beyond Mr. Arredondo and included the dozens of well-armed officers from Mr. McCraw's own agency, the Department of Public Safety, as well as the scores from the U.S. Border Patrol. As seen on a surveillance video released as part of the report, local police officers, including the chief, Arredondo, arrived minutes later but retreated down a hallway after being met with gunfire at the doorway to one of the classrooms. We showed you that. Even as more heavily armed officers arrived, along with ballistic shields, they did not attempt to enter the classroom for over a frickin' hour. That was the wrong decision, Mr. McCraw said in the days after, saying the call to do so had been made by Mr. Arredondo, who, he said, was the incident commander. This guy doesn't want to be the incident commander. Nobody wants to make these decisions. Mr. Arredondo told the committee that he did not consider himself to be in that role during the massacre and thought someone else would take that role. The police chief thought someone else was going to do it. You believe that? But the committee found that he should have been the incident commander based on the school district's own response plan for a school shooting, which calls for the school police chief to become the person in control of the efforts of all law enforcement and first responders that arrive at the scene. You don't think the police chief knew his responsibilities? I think he did, and he's lying. That's what I think. Leonard Sandoval, whose grandson, Xavier Lopez, died on the way to the hospital after being shot, said the report laid bare what the community had long known, that officers failed to stop the shooter in time and then released misleading information to the public. Xavier, he later learned, had suffered a single shot in the back and was alive when the officers finally breached the classroom. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. We all make mistakes. We're all human, but they should have admitted to it and then resigned. It's the lying that hurts. Wow. Wow, the only person who actually ran into the school in Uvalde to rescue the kids was an unarmed woman. Did you know that? We covered her, and then she got harassed by the cops. Uvalde mom, who ran into the school to save her kids during the shooting, says local police are intimidating her. We covered that. They're sitting out in front of her house, flashing their lights from their police cruisers into her house, stuff like that, trying to intimidate her. So there are no worse people in the world than the Uvalde cops, I think. Some people would say, no, Jimmy, what about terrorists? I don't know. You want to become a cop, then be a cop. If you're a coward, don't become a cop. Become a comedian. Don't become a cop. But that's the kind of people who become cops. Guys who like to play dress up with their cowboy hats, but who will never risk their life to save you or save your kids or do anything. But they will bully the shit out of you at a moment's notice. Sacramento, back here in Los Angeles, Bakersfield, Indianapolis, Louisville, Cincinnati, Tulsa, Oklahoma City. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all the tickets for all our shows.